Welcome back to 22 News in Focus. We've been talking about the proposed Hard Rock International Casino proposed to go in West Springfield, and we are talking to Brian Griffin, West Springfield Town Councilor, and Tim Brennan from the Pioneer Valley Planning Commission. Thanks again for being here. We mentioned earlier in the program how our law here, our gaming law, differs from other states. And you both have had the chance to look into that and do a little comparison. What have you found?
I think the Massachusetts law is a really fine one and has learned from the experiences of other states. In many states, there has been not any thought whatsoever given to surrounding communities, let alone having the surrounding community have to have an agreement with the developer. I haven't been able to find anything close to that, and that's one that gets celebrated anywhere you go in terms of learning from the experiences of others to advantage. So I think Massachusetts and our state legislature did a really good job on that particular piece.
Yeah, no, it's the first in the nation, from what I understand from our research, that any surrounding community that would be impact would be part of this host agreement. So it's a really good initiative. I think it protects the region, if you will, you know, I can assure you from the West Springfield perspective, it is a regional approach. Springfield's included in that as well. You know, as well as Agawam, of course, and potentially some other communities that would exist under a surrounding community agreement.
It's interesting to note that West Springfield is a host, but can also be a surrounding community depending on which proposal. So you can wear both hats.
Yeah, it's funny because that's when we started the original mitigation committee with the town council for the mitigation for the two Springfield casinos. Not that we were dead set against it or anything like that. The perception was that we were, but no, we just wanted to enter the conversation based on the surrounding communities. So that's how this all got rolling, and that we all started to talk about the surrounding communities. And then when the Hard Rock and Eastern States entered the equation, we kind of hit the ground running here, which was helpful.
And now they've got to be doing the same, I'm sure.
So it's kind of like a move. It's a puzzle. It's moving pieces, but it's really, really interesting. And you know, I like the legislation as it was intended as well. And if you look at the Hard Rock proposal, I will tell you, I think you're getting what the intended legislation was enacted for. And you have a resort-style destination with a casino. So if you've got some retail, you've got some restaurants, you have the concert venue, you have the spa, you have the hotel, you have everything that would be a resort destination, and there's a casino there as well.
Sure.
Not that I want to sell that to the residents or one, but you know, if you're looking at the legislation, and if I took myself out of the equation and said to myself, what is the best? What was the best proposal? I would say it would be Hard Rock at this point.
From what you have found, you know, looking at the different proposals as well, what do you think needs to be in that host agreement if Springfield is chosen, you know, to sort of mitigate the impact for West Springfield? You know, what are some of those elements that you're finding need to at least be considered? And of course, we've talked about traffic, but
the ones that we hear the most about, and again, this comes from conversations and looking at other places, traffic, which we've already spoken to, education. Many of the school districts in Connecticut, when some of the casinos came forward there, had very, very significant impacts and costs put on their school departments. Housing. Do we have enough housing units? How many new? Where are they going to be? And again, each of these issues shifts depending upon where particularly the casino would sit. So some of these are transferable, but some of them are very unique.
And do you see the opportunity for some kind of, you know, infrastructure projects coming out of this? I mean, what kind of communication is there with the actual gaming companies as far as, well, if you're going to do this, we're going to need this? You know, is there that negotiation, you know?
It has to be, because the host agreement has to be brought forward and shared with the public, as was said earlier on. The public at large has to understand what they're voting on. It can't be very sort of superficial. It has to be very concrete. So that's why all this discussion between host community and surrounding community is going to be so all important before these votes are taken later on in the year.
So when do you think a host agreement would be put together, you know, so that the residents know when they need to be at least weighing in on this, or, you know, I mean,
We go back to the legislation, Laura, and the legislation says that once you do have the host agreement, let's say in West Springfield it would be June, and then it would be published for at least 60 to 90 days, and then the referendum vote would take place. So that would take you into September. That's if the June marker was there. Can it be reached? It might be. There might be some time constraints there, but Tim might expound upon that a little bit.
Again, it's a two-stage process. The chairman of the Gaming Commission spoke earlier about the vetting of the various proposals, but then there's a very specific proposal that has to be brought forward for the Gaming Commission to vote on, and that can't come forward unless there's agreements with the hosts and the surrounding communities. So going back to what he said earlier, this does have to fall in place in a fairly tight time frame if you're ever going to see a license issued early on in 2014.
Do you think West Springfield residents will support this?
You know, the only way that I think that they would support it is if they had any and all information available to them so that they could make an accurate judgment. I'm not saying that they wouldn't support it. I just think they're more inclined, and they're very, very educated people who would be more inclined to have as much information as humanly possible. So if they could click on a website, or they could watch it on TV, or we keep it so open so that everybody knows what's going on at all times. That's one of the only ways that'll happen.
Springfield, Holyoke, and Palmer all have a history of at least voting on this in some capacity, but West Springfield is not in that position. Is that right? We've never actually had any kind of a poll or vote, not that you can remember.
Not that I'm aware of.
No, I'm not aware of that.
But even if the previous votes were taken, you have to keep in mind that they were not necessarily voting on a specific proposal with details around it. So I think that changes the dynamic. It gives a lot more information to the voter.
It's very different when you have an image to look at and a plan to talk about and details to really represent the idea, for sure.
Absolutely.
I want to thank you both so much for being here and talking to us about your research and your information, and it certainly is an interesting process, an in-depth one, one that I'm sure we'll be talking about again in the near future. Thank you so much. Appreciate it. And we're going to have the last word for you after the break. Stay with us. You're watching 22 News in Focus.